Climate change gets worse, and one wonders, what are the governments of this world actually doing to stop it? A lot of talking, actually, but not enough walking. You might have heard about COP, which happens every year around November, where the governments and others meet to discuss action on climate change. But what is COP actually, and has it achieved anything so far? In the short video, we'll explain what COP is, who is involved, what COP has achieved, why progress has been rather slow, to be honest, and what the outlook is going forward. At the end of the video, we'll give you some extra info on how we all can influence our leaders at COP and take action on climate change in general. So stick with us. Hi, I'm Björn from Climate Education, where we produce videos where we inform you about climate change and sustainability and empower you to stop the climate crisis. We will now explain the main points of COP, what it is, what it aims to achieve, why progress has been rather slow, and how we can try to make our voices heard around COP. So let's get right into it. So what is COP? Well, COP stands for the Conference of the Parties. The parties are the countries of the world, and they have been meeting since the early 90s to discuss action to stop climate change. In fact, they have done so almost every year, starting in 1995 in Berlin. The COP in 2024 is already the 29th COP, sparking the obvious question of what has been achieved so far and whether that style of approach is effective. But let's get into that later. The yearly conferences are held under the UNFCCC or UNFCCC, another acronym which stands for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which sets the framework for what shall be aimed for, by whom, how, and by when. The COPs are basically the place to discuss the implementation and the evaluation. So, what's the purpose of COP? Well, the purpose of COP is guided by the aims of the UNFCCC, of which almost every country of the world is a member of. To put it very simply, it aims to prevent dangerous climate change, or, as it states, to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic, meaning human-caused, interference with the climate system. Through COP, countries are supposed to find agreement on ways to achieve this ultimate objective, which has materialized in an internationally recognized agreement such as the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. You might have heard about the Paris Agreement. Well, it's called that way because it has been agreed upon at the 21st COP, which was held, no surprise, in Paris in 2015. Other agreements you might have heard of is the Kyoto Protocol, which was signed in 1997. The difference between those two agreements is basically that the Kyoto Protocol applied basically only for developed countries, while the Paris Agreement applies to all countries. The latter is also more ambitious in its goal, such as aiming for limited global warming to under 2 degrees Celsius and for efforts to keep it below 1.5 degrees. So essentially, the COP meetings are supposed to ensure that these goals are met and further dangerous climate change is prevented. Next, who is actually attending COP? COP meetings take place every year, and it's a gathering of all sorts of people and organizations. First, it is of course a gathering of government representatives, such as environmental ministers and sometimes head of states. But in fact, it's not only politicians who are discussing at COP. As COP has been steadily growing over the years with tens of thousands of participants, a colorful mix of organizations and groups are attending it. This includes, of course, scientists and experts on the matter of climate change, energy, and others, but also civil society groups and activists such as representatives from NGOs. And it also includes representatives from companies, or lobbyists, so to say. And these lobbies are really many by now, and they have influence over negotiations, believe me. And yes, lobbyists from fossil fuel companies are also there. Just so that there's no confusion, not everyone who's attending COP can attend equally everywhere. The venues at COP are separated into different zones. This means that climate justice activists and NGOs are not at the same table as environmental ministers and heads of states, and sometimes even some lobbyists. And this differentiation of access heavily decides how much influence activists or company lobbyists can actually exercise over the outcome of a COP. So now to the key question, how successful has COP been so far? Well, this depends on how you look at it, I'd say. In short, there has been progress, but not nearly enough to stop the climate crisis. So here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. First, the good. Well, first of all, it's important to note that 198 countries, so almost all nations of this world, are part of the UNFCCC and participate in COP. There is agreement that climate change is real, it's urgent, and to stop it, the world needs to become carbon neutral by 2050. The Paris Agreement has been a milestone in that it has been agreed to limit global warming to 2 degrees and even 1.5 degrees. The world leaders are coming together each year at COP, through which the topic of climate change keeps being on the agenda of the media and others as well. COP is also an opportunity that not only rich, powerful, developed countries are at the table of discussion, but also developing nations, least developing nations, and small island states. As mentioned, civil society organizations and activists are also attending COP. Now to the bad. Well, obviously, despite 3 decades of COP, greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. Some scientists argue that achieving the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is unrealistic, and the best we could achieve right now is the goal of limiting it to 2 degrees of warming, if countries of the world would actually really try hard. How is this possible that the progress has been so slow if leaders at COP had agreed to limiting global warming and take action? It probably takes a separate video just on this one to really elaborate on it, but simply put, vested interest by certain states and the lobbyists working in the background at COP have been very successful at delaying a faster transition to renewable energy. Well, if that was the bad, what is the ugly? All right, prepare yourself. Despite science being clear that global warming is happening primarily because of the burning of fossil fuels, the leaders of the world have yet to put a call to phase out fossil fuels into any final declaration at COP. Well, in the last COP, at least a transition away from fossil fuel was mentioned, but that's actually not the same. Many countries have plans to continue to dig up, sell, or burn coal, oil, and gas, and use yet to be proven technology, which will capture emissions and store them underground. That's what CCS refers to, carbon capture and storage. So the strategy is clear here, to delay the transition away from fossil fuels as long as possible. Why? Because money. Some companies, banks, countries, and investors are profiting heavily from fossil fuels. The later the transition to renewable energy is completed, the more money they can make. And as said, they have been quite successful with this. And while their pockets continue to be filled, others have to suffer the consequences. Leaders from small island states at COP have pointed out again and again and again that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is a matter of pure survival for them. So far, the other leaders at COP continue to treat them as sacrifices that will have to happen because of their delay tactics. So, what's next for COP? The host country of COP changes every year and rotates between the regions of the world. COP29 will happen at the end of 2024, for example, in Azerbaijan. And the year before, it was in the UAE, and in 2022, Egypt was the host, and the year before, it was the United Kingdom, and so forth. You might have noticed a pattern here. Many of the countries who have been or will be hosting COP are economies who still heavily depend on the export of fossil fuels. The last president of COP in the UAE is actually also the chair of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. A clear conflict of interest, not good. And the bad news continues. The host of the next COP in Azerbaijan is another fossil fuel veteran who has been working for the state oil company of the Azerbaijan Republic. Maybe this shouldn't come as a surprise, as Azerbaijan's exports come to over 90% from oil and gas. It is disappointing nonetheless. At COP29, it is vital that governments work toward a new finance goal for climate action that reflects the growing urgency of climate change. Wealthier countries will have to put their money where their mouth is by supporting climate action in less wealthy countries. So, final question, what is it actually that we all can do? So, as we have learned now, COP has had little progress, but obviously not nearly as quick and bold enough as we needed to prevent further dangerous climate change. While some question whether the format of COP even still makes actually sense, it's hard to see a realistic alternative that might work better in its place. So the big question really is, what can we all do to get the leaders of this world to do the right thing and phase out fossil fuels with the speed that we need them to? Of course, only few of us will ever attend a COP, but you don't need to do that to put pressure on your political leaders or on banks and corporations. It comes down to making your voice heard. Easier said than done, I know, but there are some ways how to do it. Think about two things when it comes to climate change. First, why do you care about climate change? And second, what do you want the other to do about it? This will be what we call your story about climate change. Now, tell your story to those who can make the change, such as the leaders at COP. You can do this, for example, by tagging them on social media, writing their office an email or letter. This can be really short and really only needs to focus on the two questions we just mentioned. Just make sure that if you do so, to give your message a personal note. That's basically it. So, your story could, for example, sound something like this. I'm a father of 2 young children, and I'm worried about their future because climate change will threaten their health and their lives through extreme weather events such as heat waves and drought. I therefore urge you to call on the leaders of the world at COP to commit to a swift phase-out of fossil fuels. Thank you. Of course, you can start by simply having a small conversation with a friend about climate change at your workplace or at your school or so. Every small action counts, and as long as the topic of climate change is being discussed, it will eventually contribute to creating pressure for the change that we all want to see. So thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, please consider giving a thumbs up and subscribe, as it really helps us to increase the visibility of this channel and get more people on board to fight the climate crisis. Big thanks for now in advance, and see you in the next video. Bye for now.